Well, a very good morning, good afternoon to you, everybody, wherever you're joining from in the world. I know straight away we have somebody from Bahrain, so I would say marhaba, sabah al khair in my best Arabic. So thank you for joining us all the way from Bahrain. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, James, one of my oldest friends in technology. And I don't mean that from the point of view of, your beard and the graying hair. I mean, the time that we've spent together. I'm absolutely delighted that you could join us to kick off what is HashiDays here, of course. HashiCorp, we're very pleased to have a number of events happening simultaneously across Europe. And I can't think of any better way than to start it with you, James. So welcome. Thank you so much. And first of all, how are you?
I'm great. Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I'm well, although probably not as well as you. You're in that basking in success, that glow, that afterglow of winning the treble.
For those who don't know, yes, I am a Manchester City fan, so I apologise to any Inter fans, or I don't apologise to Manchester United fans necessarily. But yes, thank you, James, for observing that. I've just come back from Istanbul, actually, so I was there at the weekend, and never thought in my lifetime, having been a Manchester City fan for as long as I have, that we would ever win anything, never mind the treble. So thank you, James. I appreciate that, and to all my fellow City fans around the world, congratulations, and I hope you enjoyed the moment.
There you go. There you go. So I'm well. I am well. I'm not that well, but I'm well.
Good. Well, I think that perhaps what we should do is talk a little bit about how, you and I have known each other for a long, long time. In fact, I'm going to go back and say, and keep me honest here, when cloud first became a thing, and we're going to show our age here, right? So my guess is it would have been around 2008, 9, 10, something like that, when there was a group on Twitter called the Clouderati, which you and I were members of, if you remember. And I think it was really cool at the time, because I obviously came from an enterprise background. So I was poking around on private cloud, which at the time, if you remember, I was ridiculed for calling things private cloud because everybody else was trying to rush to public cloud. And people were trying to compare what I was doing in enterprise to Netflix, which, our shared friend, Adrian Cockcroft, who was the chief architect at Netflix, and obviously the brains behind a lot of what happened there. People were trying to compare what I was doing in a massive enterprise with what Adrian was doing, which of course was nonsense. And of course, most of the Clouderati stuff was just opinion. And take me back to that, James, if you will. I guess it was, I don't even know when RedMonk was founded. Maybe we should start there.
Oh, no, don't. Let's not embarrass ourselves too much, Christian. But let's just say, I would be lying if I said that RedMonk was cloud native. I mean, I do think that as a firm, we were pretty early to identifying and understanding the importance of the model. I think that as a company, we've sort of gone through some different reds of technology. We were sort of born as a company, an advisory company that really understood open source. Over time, it sort of began to be apparent that it wasn't open source itself that was the really important thing, so much as what it was enabling, and the changes in how technology was being adopted. And that'll be in all sorts of companies, whether they be startups, enterprises, ISVs. Didn't really matter what the category was. With open source, there wasn't quite as much need to ask for permission. And it was clear that what was actually happening was that practitioners were being enabled, were more effective, less need to ask for permission, and less purchasing driven IT. I mean, when we began in this business, everything started with sales. There was no infrastructure there if you hadn't bought something. And then for teams to actually use that technology, it was a service request. And it was something that, you'd be literally waiting months for infrastructure to be available. So for us, at least, we were already ensconced in this world of open source. And when cloud hit, and it was this notion that anybody on the planet essentially could get a credit card and could be using infrastructure, that was another really fundamental change and enabler in being able to do new things. So I think that look, it was easy to. In fact, I wrote a piece. I think it was 14 ways to tell it's not a cloud, and one of them was there's a consultant in the room. It was I think for us at RedMonk, we were always pragmatic. We understood that, to your point, enterprises were going to want hybridity, or at least they were going to want private cloud sorts of solutions so that they can have self-service, so they can have their teams doing less need to ask for permission. But basically, yeah, I think the cloud changed everything. And that was one reason we all got so excited, because here it was, the opportunity for engineers to begin to take a lead role in improving their organizations and how they were building applications and how they were doing these digital transformations.
So let me go back a little bit, James, on the the question of where this all started, right? Because I remember drawing diagrams of networking and data centers and whatever with Visio or on whiteboards, where you would draw this thing in the middle that always.
You were like the meme guy, the guy in front of the post-it notes, the crazy meme guy, weren't you?
Well, that's what you did, right? I mean, we were all trying to figure out. I mean, you could tell something was changing, right? Because it was. I mean, we still think about Salesforce being new, right? And it's 20 odd years old, and this notion of cloud and things that were somewhere outside of the control of IT, like in this cloud thing that we kept drawing with 2 lightning strikes on it, was you connect from something to something else. Mm-hmm. And then we began to understand, well, actually, we can do this a different way. We can not, to your point though. I mean, I remember when virtualization first came out, and Cameron Haidt from Gartner, if you remember the comment, when he said, physical infrastructure takes 6 weeks to provide in an enterprise. And then when virtualization came along, he said, hey, guess what? It still takes 6 weeks to provide virtual infrastructure, because the process around it kind of hadn't caught up. Yep. So, and I remember having all these conversations about, what's the right cloud, and is the cloud more secure? And friends like Chris Hoff that we have would say, well, more secure than what? So there was always this question about, is what we do really better? And I think everybody at the time, and again, we're going back over a decade here, felt like there would be this tipping point where every single piece of on-premise, technology disappeared into this cloud that we drew, and that would be the end of it. So, from your point of view, James, I know you talk to a lot of companies, big, medium, small, and have been very active in this industry. Where are we? And where have we been? And if you take the crystal ball out, maybe let's say 3 years, 5 years from now, knowing that there really is no right or wrong answer, I mean, where is it all going?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think at RedMonk we've tended to say, we'll tell you what's going to happen. We can't quite tell you when. Look, I think the movement of travel is still pretty clear that public cloud becomes ever more important. At least in the sense of managed services. So one of the beauties of this open source world that I described, and indeed the fact that the people could use cloud services, was that there was no need to ask for permission, and people could build things, and they did so. But of course, then what you end up happening was sort of huge teams to manage the infrastructure that had been built, and we've seen this repeatedly, especially in and around database. If we think about the sort of the current relational renaissance, frankly, I think some of that was driven. Why are people so happy to use Postgres? Because it's a managed service. Ever since Heroku, it's something you didn't need to think about it. But we saw this with sort of Hadoop, where organizations, like HSBC, spent vast amounts of money standing up this sort of Hadoop cluster so that they could improve their risk management. And then over time, they just turned around and said, hang on a minute, we're going to outsource this. Let Google do that. We'll use BigQuery, and we'll have it as a managed service. That made sense for them. At the other end of the spectrum, you have a company like Spotify. And sure, Spotify has the best engineers on the planet building the services, and they could theoretically manage their own data infrastructure. But again, what did they say? Hang on a sec. Actually, let's just use Google stuff because it's managed for us. So I think the having a world of managed services is so important, and we see that as just growing insignificant, because it doesn't make any sense to have, what are you going to have? You're going to have like 40 people managing your Elastic cluster so that you can do observability. Or, a team to manage Redis so that you can build the applications to take advantage of that. So I think what we see is more and more adoption of managed services. So in my 3 to 5 year time horizon, I think we'll still see, that becoming ever more important. And it's going to be true for, whatever the software it is that we're using. Huge impact of AI. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit, but generative AI is a really substantial and significant change in how we build, run, and manage systems. It's going to affect every part of the software development lifecycle. So we're going to see a lot of AI being used. I I mean, I think those two things, managed services and AI, those will begin to define the structure of the services we're using and building. And I think the final one is like, look, we've had a huge, I mean, a lot of my career has been watching this pendulum swing to freedom and not needing to ask for permission. And that's great. Developers have all of these things they could choose and use: programming languages, frameworks. There's a new JavaScript framework every week. And there's all of this stuff. Databases. One day, oh look, now Supabase has arrived. Hey, I can use Planet Scale. There's all of this cool stuff out there. But organizations, I mean, that's the cognitive overhead for the developer. The developer ends up having to manage that. Organizations can't handle that, and certainly from a cost perspective, from a governance perspective, from a data sovereignty perspective, all of those perspectives, we're expecting to see quite a big wave of organizations getting their arms around things and saying, look, we need a standard operating model. We need to think about the platform. We need to start restricting those choices, but still enabling creativity and velocity. So I think we're probably, I mean, IT architecture is back. And that's one of the things I think we'll see: freedom, managed services, AI, but with more control. Enterprise architecture is back in the room.
So well, there's a couple of things, James. I want to park, right? Because, we'll talk a little bit in terms of practical things that companies can do. I mean, again, I think being spoilt for choice is great, but it's also a burden, right? Because, everybody's trying to figure out exactly how to navigate through the evolution of this stuff, right? We're talking about platform teams, internal developer platforms. My first reaction to that stuff is, wow, I mean, I don't remember many enterprises that have product management capability, and yet everybody's touting that you should be running these things as a product, right? So we'll park a little bit of that, because I want to bring that into some of the practical things we can do towards the end of the session. But let me sort of talk a little bit about, or maybe ask your opinion. Every year we do, just around this time, we do a state of cloud survey, right? And so we did it in 21, we've done it in 22. In fact, today, and I'm hoping we can share the link with everybody here, this has just been released for 23. Some of the things that we've seen around multi-cloud is a theme, right? So we saw multi-cloud in 21, we saw multi-cloud in 22, we've seen multi-cloud in 23. And I think, as the dust settled over the debate around private cloud versus public cloud, and everybody kind of said, well, perhaps multi-cloud is the right strategy, whether that's by choice or by accident. And by accident, I mean, if I'm in a big company and I acquire a smaller one, there's the chance that it has a different cloud strategy than the one I was using at the, the parent company level, for example. We've seen lots of customers and lots of enterprises over the years choose cloud strategically for cost or risk or sovereignty and all those things together. So there's a couple of things. Well, there's actually three things I want to pick up on and just get your opinion on that to me were really interesting from the results that we got from this survey. And again, remember, these are only, results from the sample set that we see. So it's not really indicative of a global set of trends that we would point in every single case. But I think if you keep it in the context of the types of people we talk about in the types of industries, there's three things that I wanted to just pick out and get your immediate reaction on, because one of them was really surprising to me. Two of them weren't, and one of them was really surprising. So if you think about, where we are in sort of the financial stature of the world, there's talk about these economic uncertainty, there's talk about cost of living crises, there's talk about high inflation, there's talk about interest rates being not under control. And yet one of the things that we saw was that 56% of the respondents said that they boosted cloud spending in the last year despite that macroeconomic uncertainty. So is that something that you see? I mean, is everybody still in this cloud gold rush, or are we being a little bit more concerted in our efforts to be selective about what we do? Or is this gold rush that was there sort of pre-pandemic, is that still out there? What are you seeing?
Well, I don't know if it's a gold rush, but it's how we do business. And you have to get from A to B, and also look, let's understand a lot of what happens in tech is driven by the incentives of sales forces. And if you're Microsoft or Google, or Amazon, you're out there selling the hell out of this stuff. And certainly as it becomes more strategic, and I've talked about this, people trying to get their arms around it. Yeah, we see that there is more need for more capacity. And also it gets back to sort of Jevons paradox. You know, the more efficiency we drive into the system, the more need and the more demand there is for services. And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that people would be increasing their spend in the cloud, because, you know, yeah, that's literally, that is how we do IT today.
So let me counter with this then, and you know, get your opinion straight away of that. So part of that 56% of cloud spend is kind of good news, I think, for the industry, and it kind of, you know, sort of vindicates the fact that we're on this journey and providing technologies to get there. But one of the more eye-watering things that came back from the survey on that same topic was that 94% of organizations still believe that they're wasting money in cloud through, you know, over provisioning, poor resourcing.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, yeah, it's sort of an irony that, I mean, we're really good at turning things on, but we're not so good at turning them off. And, you know, I've got 3 kids, and I, you know, luckily I am able to like walk around the house turning off lights, you know, behind them, trying to persuade my son that he doesn't need to use 2 screens when he's, you know, trying to do homework, play Brawlhalla, and watch a YouTube video. Maybe do one of those things, turn a screen off. But yeah, no, and we've sort of it's configuration and sort of defaults, being able to turn things off in an automated fashion. As an industry, we've just been really bad at that. And there's no doubt, I mean, in the same way that we don't, you know, have not historically secured our S3 buckets, and that's led to data leakage repeatedly until finally Amazon recently changed the default behaviors. Yeah, there's no doubt that you turn things off and you don't necessarily turn them off again. And I think that's, yeah, 100%. We are not, I mean, we've serverless, you know, this notion of scaling to zero. How often are we really scaling to zero? We spend all of that, once you spun the thing up, it's like, oh yeah, that's running, let's just leave it alone. And I think that's a big opportunity, and I think we'll just have to get better at that.
Okay, so second thing that struck me, and this was, there's kind of 2 parts to this as well. So the kind of the headline takeaway is that 92% of respondents see multi-cloud as driving business success. And within that sort of framework, and again, this is in the report, so I'd urge everybody to go download it and read it at leisure. But the question was, has multi-cloud strategy advanced or achieved your company's business goals? And 73% of that said yes. Now, I know that when I sort of set out on this journey, what feels like an eternity ago, much of what we were doing on the technology side was absolutely linked to the change in the business environment in which we were in. I don't know that I've had that many conversations, you know, through my time at Citrix as CTO there, then obviously here at Hashi. I've never had that many conversations where the people who we're talking to can articulate exactly how the technology that they're applying meets or exceeds or contributes to a business goal. And I know, obviously, with you being in the application world, which is clearly much closer to work process that drives business and hopefully efficiencies and revenue and all that kind of stuff. Does that number surprise you, that 73% of people would say that multi-cloud strategy achieved the company's business goals? If that's not a surprise, I think we're on a really, really good trajectory if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at that, I'm intrigued. You know, what does that actually look like in practice? We're still, I mean, there are very good, 2023, and I mean, I think there'd be questions to what do we really mean by multi-cloud? I mean, certainly, one expects those organizations are not like, you know, we're not in that fever dream we had about like sort of workloads flowing from one cloud to another depending on cost at any given perspective. but you know, a well thought out even set of application architectures. And again, you know, the incentives of the industry to get people onto those clouds have meant that, sure, I mean, you know, organizations are definitely getting value out of Amazon, and they're getting value out of Azure, and they can play one against the other, I guess, from a cost perspective in the sales. But I'm honestly, I don't know the answer to this. Business value driven by multi-cloud, to me, is just a little bit nebulous, and particularly as I'm looking at it, as I say, from a world of managed services, and what does that mean? So,
yeah, I have to say,
I'll tell you what though. Here's an example. I'll give you an actual example of business value driven by multi-cloud. GPUs, where are they, and how can we get some? Because, you know, it was bad enough with like all the crypto nonsense, but with AI now, everybody wants all the GPUs. So everyone running software, every software company on the planet, every startup, everyone is desperate to get GPUs, and enterprises as well. They're like, okay, we want to train this model, and, you know, how are we going to do that? Now, and startups, good example. So startups, they're given very often free credits from the cloud providers. And most of the time, you're like, we're just using one. We don't need to use another cloud. And then suddenly it's like, oh, wait, is there some GPUs over there that we can get? And yeah, I just had a very interesting conversation with Matthew Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare, recently. Now, Cloudflare, their view is, look, don't run, they don't have the GPUs. It's like, don't come and run, you know, don't come and train the models here. But what they do have is companies that are putting their data into Cloudflare so that they can then fan out to wherever the GPUs are. So they're actively saying, actually, yes, that thing I described as a fever dream, in this case, makes sense. Take the data to where the GPUs are. Obviously, with Cloudflare, there's no egress costs. That's one of their differentiators. And that actually is a multi-cloud topology, which is on point for current workload needs. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not what the people answering the survey meant, but that is an example of yeah, an area where multi-cloud could make sense.
Sure. Okay, well, let's get on. I know, by the way, I'll acknowledge that there's some questions that have come in from the audience, so I will get to those, and I'll give you my view and ask James for his. So please keep those coming in, and we'll get to as many as we can. The last one from the cloud survey, which, you know, this is, I'll have to put my Captain Obvious hat on here, James, for a minute and say this, but the number one rank of skills shortages that we saw. So skills and staffing gaps continue to be a critical challenge. Now you're going to go, oh, well, yeah, obviously. However, it's interesting when you sort of drill down into it a little bit. Skill shortages, teams working in silos, you know, lack of training, all those things. You know, you look around and there are millions, literally millions of unfilled tech jobs around the world, ranging from security through development and so on. And yes, of course, you know, we should acknowledge that there's been, you know, tough times, which you know, it kind of is a fact of the industry we're in. Just how bad do you think the skills shortage is, and how bad is it going to get? You know, I mean, I know we'll get to talk a little bit about AI, but one of the things that I get asked all the time, and, you know, I don't have a crystal ball that answers every question, but I do get asked a lot, you know, do you think AI is going to get rid of a bunch of jobs? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes. But what we don't seem to be able to answer is, what jobs will AI create that we didn't have before, right? Because I don't remember there ever being a prompt engineer, for example, right, before generative AI. So, you know, that's kind of an obvious example to give. But let's just talk about the sort of the skill shortage. You know, you talk to a lot of customers. You must go up and down their organizations trying to assess their capabilities and what they aspire to, and whether they're ever going to be able to get there with what they have. And of course, then we've got an influx of, you know, let's call them digital natives, you know, younger folks coming into the workforce who, you know, not only are very smart now, you know, economics graduates, let's say, but can also use Python or Perl to create their own algorithms to do certain things, because that's what you learn at school now. So where do you see that playing out? I mean, where is that skills gap in reality? And And how big do you think the void gets in the next few years?
Lots to unpack there. And it is interesting. We've got both, skill shortages and seemingly random layoffs by every major tech company. I think during lockdown we were calling it the great onboarding. Well, first of all, we had the great resignation, and then as a firm, RedMonk, we started talking about the great onboarding. And now, as my colleagues Kate Holterhoff and Kelly Fitzpatrick recently described it as the great reshuffle. So there are people being laid off, and in many cases, good people. I think they'll be able to. There is hiring going on as well. Slightly different for the enterprise, although we are now seeing some enterprise organizations that are doing some of those sorts of layoffs as well. I think that you made the point earlier. The economy is feeling a little bit weird, bit toppy. We're not really sure. Some ways the fundamentals seem sound. Look at the US, record low unemployment. Certainly for a lot of spaces, it seems like the economy is doing okay. Now, AI, absolutely. Will it make some jobs less? Managed services have already done that. I mean, some of the roles that we've traditionally had. I mean, if you were a sneaker wear engineer, we've seen DBA as a job. Sort of, we've seen organizations definitely lay off DBAs. I don't remember anyone saying they can't get a job in data engineering or some of those sorts of areas. I think everybody is going to have to up level, and there's just so much work that needs to be done. And my general position is difficult for me because I'm half English and half American, right? And the British side of me is, the sky is falling. It's all going to go tits up. It's going to be a nightmare. Am I not allowed to say that? Christian's eyes are. But anyway, everything's going to go horribly wrong. The sky is falling. You ask an English person, how are you today? And they go, I'm all right. The American side of me is quite optimistic. How are you today? Awesome. And so from that perspective, look, we're going to see many, many more apps being created. That's going to create all sorts of interesting questions for like day two operations. And to the point you made, Christian, about turning things off, we're going to create a load of apps, but they're going to need maintenance, management. They're going to need to be deprecated. There's going to be no shortage of work. So I just think, again, in that 3 to 5 year tech time horizon, there's just so much work to be done. I can't believe that, some of the prognostication. Now, for the broader economy at large, it's super interesting. A company called DeepSet, friends of mine, based in, I think they're based in Berlin, based in Germany anyway. Just before Christmas last year, German 80-year-old man calls them up. I run one of Germany's biggest legal services firms. I think that this generative AI stuff is going to fundamentally change my business, and I need you in a meeting with me within the next 2 days. And this is like just in the run up to Christmas. So you got an 80-year-old German chap in a Mittelstand company being so concerned about changes in the economy and what they will mean for his business that he's really right. So yeah, look, that's probably above my pay grade, but I tend to think that there will be some pain, but there will also be some new opportunities created.
So great segue. All these things that we're talking about, have an impact on the technology decisions companies make, obviously. And, clearly with HashiDays literally about to start, a lot.
Should we do it by sign language? No, go ahead.
Yeah, we've just got some background noise here for a second. Well, at least it's live when that happens.
Listen, right? I'm coin operator. Just ask me another question and I'll go.
So there's a fire alarm test here, which is great when it's live, isn't it? So a lot of these things in the context of why we do what we do at Hashi, helping customers to sort of move along their transformation journeys, the cloud journeys. First of all, I should mention that if you want to join us at HashiDays virtually, still can do that. I hope we can get the registration on the screen there. be great to see as many people as we can. Obviously a lot of the things that we're talking about here and the challenges that customers have and how we address them with our technologies will come out during the HashiDays, and where we're heading with the technology and how that all becomes part of the offering set and part of the value proposition to our customers. After the keynotes, by the way, there's kind of some cool demos that you'll see and some learnings that I would advise everybody to go poke around on when you register. Look at the agenda. The keynotes will be fantastic, by the way. I've already seen them, but I can't share them because I'd get shouted at if I did. But great content. I think it's fair to say that we are in a really interesting phase of the company, even though I've only been here a relatively short time. We can already see what's going on behind the scenes and where we aspire to get to. So I think everybody will really enjoy, the virtual event, and I would invite as many as you can to register for that and spend some time with us tomorrow. I want to
please respond to all future fire alarms.
There we go. Respond to all future fire alarms. So let me just ask a couple of things, James, and then we'll get to answering the questions, because obviously I want to address those in the spirit of collaboration here, in the spirit of the event. So, but I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, just because I really want to do that. And thinking back to the way that you and I have navigated this in different ways throughout the years, and I would say that I've made a lot of technology decisions in the past, some of which have worked really well, some of which haven't worked so well, all of which were well intended at the time. And when I look back on my 30 years almost in the industry now, I would say that no decision that you ever make is a wrong one. It's just kind of degrees of right at the time. And I get asked a ton of times by customers and partners, what should we be telling people? What is our opinion? Obviously we talk a lot about the cloud operating model and sort of give a framework for that. And we're working on some maturity models that go alongside that to give some more practical tips and guidance on the patterns that we see and how to kind of move through the maturity chain. But if you I ask you, here's a blank piece of paper. Give me the top 5 things that organizations should be thinking about or should be doing that will really help them move the needle on the journey. Let's assume that there's a select group of customers around the world who say, look, we realize that we need to do this. We realize we need to move the conversation away from purely cost optimization to speed optimization. Time to market's critical for us. We want to reduce the cognitive load. We want to make people more effective, more efficient in the organization. What do you write and put in an envelope, James, and let us open in 3 years from now that said, if you've done this, you'll be further along?
Yeah. It's a great question, because I think, in this period of time that we've been in the industry, we've had these big hopes and dreams about what we're going to achieve, and we're still not there yet. I mean, DevOps is 14 years old, and that's still an aspiration. For a lot of companies, we could go and do some hipster talk at conference about the latest thing, and people might be interested to hear about that. But if you go into an event in Paris or Munich or I don't know, just even London, any major city, Tokyo, wherever you are, and you just do how to do DevOps, it's going to be packed from an enterprise audience perspective, because everyone's still like, how do we get there? So what are some of the things that we should be thinking about? I mean, at base level, this thing that we're trying to build, the thing that we're trying to understand is, I mean, I guess the industry buzzword, it's a socio-technical system. So it's an interplay of people, processes, and tools. And I think too often we only see one view. And so one of the things is just to get a handle on what we do. And I mean, I'm like you, unfortunately, we're sort of old enough to have seen some of the stuff before. One of the things is, let's see what our assets are then in that context. And the term that I think that people should be moving ahead with and really thinking about is establishing a service catalog. Like, if we want to have a platform that we are able to use to underpin our application development efforts, then we really do need to think about modeling and mapping our services. So the organizations that we're sort of aspirational about, one of the companies that pursued this approach pretty aggressively is Spotify. Are you all right, Christian?
I am. Carry on. I heard noise again, but do carry on.
Okay.
Thing with the problem with live events, isn't it?
Well, anyway, I think establishing a service catalog and a platform for doing that is going to be really important. There's a lot of interest, for example, around Backstage as a means to do that at the moment. That's one open source project that people could look at. Obviously, HashiCorp has a view on this, on what service catalog should look like as it begins to tie things together. I think that's one. Of the successful organizations will have moved ahead with really understanding what their services are and therefore how they can manage them. I think really understanding at a deep level and thinking about what the teams should look like in order to have a modern operating model. There's some brilliant work, Matthew Skelton and Manuel Puig, called Team Topologies. A bit of homework. Read the book, take a look at that. Just from the thinking of, what should teams look like? Because the teams that we're going to have in this successful 3 to 5 year time horizon are going to look different from the ones today. We've certainly had this period I said of fragmentation. We've had that if you build it, you run it. We've had the lots of we've atomized everything, and now we need to sort of start bringing it back together again. Okay, it's great, this idea that you're going to have 2 pizza teams that will have network people and database people and design people and app dev people. Scaling that has proved to be really difficult. We're going to be bringing some of that back to the platform. So how big should the team be to manage the application or service? So think about the service catalog. Think about what the team looks like. One of the things we're going to have to do is collaborate. If we're moving back to a platform view of the world, we really do have to break down some of the silos. You can't have security as a completely separate group from networking, as completely separate group from automation. Now, automation may be using Terraform, security may be using Vault, networking may be using Consul, but you've got to have a conversation between those groups and pull it together again in the service of this platform team. So, if an organization is going to be successful, it's going to have had a model to improve collaboration. I mean, and all of this, I sort of sound like it's fatherhood and apple crumble in a way, but these are the sorts of things that I think are really important if we're going to see success. Too often we're not we talk about guardrails. Oh, brilliant. Okay, we're going to have these golden paths so that operators and developers are effective and efficient. But let's really think about what the standards are. Too often, for example, if we think about regulatory compliance, there's just a view that, we're going to have to do regulatory compliance. A really clear and crisp view about what the most important regulations we need to comply with are, how they're likely to change over time. Let's understand what that's going to look like, and let's start to bake that into our organization's processes and into the platform. Like the anti-pattern would be what Twitter is doing, for example. It's carnage in their European headquarters in Dublin at the moment. I saw a news story just this morning. Who's gonna understand the GDPR stuff? Who's going to understand the data sovereignty stuff? Who's going to actually make sure that organization can be functioning? And certainly how we would automate any of that. So I think having a really good set grasp of what you need to comply with, and then that's partly regulatory compliance, but also what should the standards look like? This is a separate one. I don't know. I think I'm at about 4 in terms of my 4 or 5 points. Consolidate. If automation's great, but automating something that's incredibly complex doesn't always get us to where we want to be. Part of what we need to do now is look at what we've actually got from, as I say, get what platforms are we using. Consolidation is going to be a big part of success. So that's going to be vendor consolidation, open source consolidation. You mentioned multi-cloud. Okay, choose what workloads are going to run where, And I think that's going to be one of the keys to success, because yeah, we've supported and enabled too much complexity. If we want to become better, we're going to have to start cutting back on that and saying, hang on a second, these are our strategic platforms for X. So I think that was maybe 4 points.
I think that's great advice, James. You know, I mean, the one thing, going back to when you mentioned Spotify earlier, the one thing I would add to that is, you know, just remember that every organization is unique. You know, there is no, I mean, there's plenty of, it's interesting if you Google the Spotify tribes thing that you mentioned, and obviously Backstage came from Spotify and so on, but there's plenty of things out there that say why you should copy Spotify's attitude and not their implementation. You know, because I think if you say, look, I'm going to try and lift and shift what Spotify did, a very unique, you know, offering in a very unique industry with a lot of, you know, things that enterprises don't have, and vice versa. Look, sure, by all means, the attitude and the approach, yes, the model probably isn't going to work for you.
Well, sort of, except the idea of having a developer platform where the developer comes in, logs on for the day, has a standard set of libraries for, you know, application development, and is able to just say, spin me up a Kubernetes cluster from that space. I do think there is value to a developer platform. So I'd agree, we're not all Spotify, but we do need to. We've put too much cognitive overhead on developers. You know, they've had to be good at automation. They're supposed to know Helm charts. They're supposed to know all the YAML so they can do Kubernetes. They're supposed to understand database. They're supposed to understand JavaScript and Java. And, you know, oh, and by the way, now we're doing like shift left security. So you're supposed to understand buffer overflow, overrun errors, and, you know,
and DNS. Nobody understands DNS. Not even the people that
SQL injection, DNS. Yeah, like nobody understands. But there are some not weirdos. That's unfair. There are some special people that understand DNS, but like most developers, they're not going to. So I think that we need to lower the cognitive overheads in order to make people more productive. And yeah, I do think a developer platform and a platform team, that is a sensible approach, whether you're Spotify or a bank or a telco or a supermarket.
I agree. I think the point I was making was, you know, if you think about their model and what they implemented, you know, you talked about the classic iron triangle. And by the way, I've been talking about that for 30 years, the people, process, technology, people, process, tools, whatever. Yeah. I think the thing that I guess I'm guarding against is people trying to copy the exact model as it relates to the people and the process, right? Because, you know, every organization is different. It can only consume what it can consume. Yep. You know, if you go take a 100-year-old organization and apply tribes and guilds and all that to it, there's a fair chance you're going to get, you know, a pretty bad set of results. But no, I would agree on the developer platform and agree on all that and the cognitive overload reduction, of course. So, okay, let me get to a couple of the questions here, James. If you've got anything to chime in here, please do. One of them is Hashi specific. So the first one came from Mesut. So thank you for that. Do we have any plans at Hashi to do something with the use of cloud and AI technologies together? I think I'll take the cloud one first. I think the answer is obviously yes. You know, we have the HashiCorp cloud platform, and I would say please keep your ears out for tomorrow's keynote, where you may hear some interesting things about the HashiCorp cloud platform, or HCP as we call it here. The AI technologies, let me take that measure if I can, in the context of a question that came from Jason, where he said, I question what we're really saying with AI and cloud. Is it for observability, ease of deployment, configuration, creation, or management? And also, do we trust AI designed by another party? Well, let me try and answer that in a sort of few different ways, and then I'll throw it to James for final comment on it. I think first of all, we're in, just as you know, and I know we sound like two old guys like the Muppets here on the balcony, but you know, James and I have seen this movie before. Cloud washing was at its peak in 2010, right, where everybody suddenly had a cloud and everything was cloud and everything was always going to be cloud and this, that, and the other. It kind of feels the same with AI, right? I mean, first of all, AI is not new, right? This is the third or fourth winter, depending on what you believe. I think for the most part, what we're talking about still, and I hope it stays that way at the moment, is kind of artificial narrow intelligence. And I think in some cases, if you think about things like AI ops and so on, I think we're really talking about ML still. So let's be clear on a few definitions here. So, you know, ML is good at doing a lot of things, and especially when it comes into operations, you know, we're looking for trends, we're looking for patterns, we're looking for predictive failures or predictive security things, just like you see in your own bank when you go up, to a different country and you use your debit card or your ATM, and then you get a thing on your phone saying, is this really you? All those things around predictability and responding to things that are not common, and by that I mean repeatable patterns, I think is super useful, and that's one area. I think there's a lot of things within observability that can inform optimization over time without a shadow of a doubt. How to get the best out of cloud spend that we've talked about by truly understanding the patterns of usage and then adjusting things accordingly, I think is super interesting. And that comes, whether that is in the ease of deployment or whether it's more around configuration creation. I think the answer to that is probably yes. When I think about longer term configuration creation, and again, I would equate this somewhat to what we've seen in the low code, no code revolution over the past decade or so. I don't think it's going to be too long before natural language processing, machine learning, let's call it, generative AI, comes together to understand how I declare the intent of an application, and it spits out the infrastructure configuration and the code. Now, that might sound a bit science fiction, but if you really think about all the piece parts, I'm not sure it's that far off conceptually, being able to, and I was joking actually at the weekend when I was telling somebody about, if you remember Dreamweaver, Dreamweaver, which was revolutionary and democratized web development in the very early years. I didn't need to know anything about HTML or CSS to be able to drag and drop stuff on a screen that gave me all the code behind the scenes. Now, I'm using a very simple example there, but if you think about it, if I want to declare how an app should work, I think over time, the backends will get smart enough to understand what I'm trying to do and give me one or more configuration options that meet that. And I think that's not a million miles away, quite frankly. Would I trust AI designed by another party? I think that's a giant question, isn't it? And I think it's reflective of where we are in the industry when you have the CEO of OpenAI before the US Congress begging for regulation. I think that's a really interesting point because it's usually the opposite, right? So I think the trust of AI is going to be really interesting. I mean, we've already seen some crazy examples of people, copying and pasting their IP into OpenAI without really understanding what the context of that is and what the implication is. We're also seeing something which is my new favorite term, which is AI hallucination, which if you haven't Googled that yet, please go and do it. I won't spend time now because we're heading towards the end. But go and Google AI hallucination. It's kind of terrifying what may happen with polymorphic malware and some of the bad things that could happen there. So again, it depends how we define trust. I think we have to tiptoe into this quite honestly before something really bad happens. But again, we'll see what happens with the regulation. So James, let me throw it to you. As we're sort of coming to the end of it here. First of all, thank you for your time. It's always wonderful to catch up and to share your insights and to share your deep knowledge. Leave us, if you will, with a cliffhanger. A typical RedMonk. I'm going to put this on Twitter like you've always done and just leave it with no context. Leave us with one of those, if you will, and we'll wrap up and invite everybody again to HashiDays.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know about a cliffhanger, but I do think that, and I wrote about this during lockdown. We were all struggling to put together compelling online events, and a lot of times it was basically sort of Zoom. It's just throw Zoom at the problem and hope that the event is good. But one of the companies that did really interesting things in thinking through what the event should look like online was HashiCorp. I mean, I think there were probably three companies that impressed me. One was Vercel, one was Microsoft, and the other was HashiCorp. And I wrote a piece which was basically, are you ready to be a media company? And I think that the HashiCorp, basically the way they put events together, where you had really slickly produced keynotes, and you'd have Armin in some just unbelievably beautiful. Well, that's probably just his apartment, but some unbelievably fantastically designed, beautiful sort of place, giving the talks with really sophisticated graphics and everything else. And then they actually HashiCorp built its own platform. They felt that Zoom wasn't quite right for them. They built their own platform, and this is sort of a mark of I guess HashiCorp sort of a desire to control and enable a great experience, but B, ability to just build good systems. It was really good. It was really good the way that worked, and they're great, you know, sort of moderators on there. And I just think that, yeah, so we travel too much. You know, I'm coming to the event tomorrow because it's in London. I can get on my bike. It's an E1. I can be there in 25 minutes. I really only want to go to events I can go to on my bike. But yeah, no need. We don't need to travel all the time. And yeah, I would just say, you know, HashiCorp are pretty good at running online events. So check out HashiDays online if you're not registered, or, you know, if you are local, then get on your bike.
James, absolute pleasure as always, my friend. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was useful, informative. Thank you so much for the questions, and for everybody from joining. Wherever you are in the world, please have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you online at HashiDays tomorrow. So James, thank you so much. And with that, we'll wrap up.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.